This is Inside the Wolf's Den, an entrepreneurial journey with Shawn and Joni Wolfswinkle.
Welcome back to Inside the Wolf's Den with your hosts, Shawn and Joni Wolfswinkle. Today we have a special guest with us, Mr. Kris Kelso. Hi, Kris. How are you doing?
I am doing great. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us today. So just giving you a brief bio on Kris. So Kris is a keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and is the author of Overcoming the Imposter, Silence Your Inner Circle and Lead with Confidence. Trained and certified as an executive coach, Kris has worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs, business owners, and their leadership teams. He is faculty instructor at the Professional Christian Coaching Institute, an advisor and instructor at the Nashville Entrepreneur Center, and is a contributing writer for publications including Fast Company Magazine, Yahoo Finance, and the Nashville Business Journal. Kris has founded multiple companies and has served on the board of directors of several nonprofit organizations. He is an active member of Cornerstone Nashville, where he serves, teaches, and coaches other leaders. He lives with his wife and 3 teenage sons in the suburbs of Nashville, Tennessee. So, Kris, again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm excited, or we're excited, to have you tell your story and the book, of course. So why don't you get into telling us a little bit about yourself and your story?
Yeah, well, you gave an overview in the bio of kind of some of the things I've done, but I've been an entrepreneur for the majority of my career. Founded 2 different companies that I grew and ran. And but a key part of my story is that when I started my first company, I had no business training whatsoever. In fact, I never even went to college. I don't have a degree. I'm just self-educated. And so I bought a stack of books from a bookstore covering everything that I thought I needed to know to run a business, anything like marketing, sales, contracts, finance, whatever.
Wow.
And I just started reading and learning. And so I learned a ton and I grew a lot during those years as an entrepreneur. But as a result of being self-educated, I always worried that there was something important that I should know that I didn't know. And that led to this phenomenon that we now know is called Imposter Syndrome, where you feel like maybe I'm not legitimate. Maybe my success is an accident, or boy, I've just had some lucky breaks, and maybe there's something missing that is going to sink me. And most importantly, maybe I'm not what everybody thinks that I am. And I'm afraid of being exposed as a fraud or being found out that I'm just making this up as I go.
Yeah, we can relate. I love the book, by the way, and I appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing your story. Because I mean, a lot of what we do on this podcast is really share, our story as entrepreneurs, and because people can relate. Like, yes, we have successes, but everybody knows that. Outside of social media, that people only post the good stuff, but
Nobody
outside
talks
of that,
about their failures.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Yes.
even as us, like, we started when we were 19 in business. And so it really resonated with us because, we started so young. And so we had meetings and we'd show up to places, and like, I always felt like an imposter because we were so young. Like, what does a 19-year-old, 20-year-old kid know what he's doing about buying and selling real estate and running businesses? And like, much like you, we were self-taught. So we have degrees, but we were, we learned as we went. We had never managed people. We had never had corporate jobs, so we had no clue what we were doing. And managing now multiple teams, sometimes you still even get that critic in your head saying like, "Hey,
you're not good enough.
Yes.
You shouldn't be up here."
And the reality
speaking.
is, so many of us feel that way. I mean, statistically, it's up to 70% of the population experiences imposter syndrome at some point in their career, but we don't talk about it enough. And it's that fear of being exposed that prevents us from talking about it, which also prevents us from connecting with other people and realizing that they often feel that way too. Because let's face it, most of us are just figuring this out as we go, right? We're just making this up as we go along. And that's part of the entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. And it's, I loved where you talked a lot about getting uncomfortable, because I think that's, it's something we live in, a model, or something that we try to emulate in our company, and especially as owners, we try to push that down. Is like, Joni and I put ourselves in multiple uncomfortable situations all the time. We're constantly pushing ourselves. And one of our core values is like we appreciate challenges and the results of overcoming them, and it's because we put ourselves in comfortable situations. So can you speak a little bit to about that? Because I know you talk a lot about that's when the imposter syndrome really steps in, or is when you're putting yourself out there and getting uncomfortable.
Yeah, the interesting thing that I learned, I learned about imposter syndrome years ago and kind of knew what it was and started to realize how it was affecting me. But when I really dug in and studied it, one of the interesting statistics was that it is more prevalent among high achievers. It's actually more common among people that are driven and ambitious and that are risk takers. And you've hit on the reason why just there is that when you are getting outside of your comfort zone, when you're taking a risk, when you're trying something for the first time, you're more likely to feel like maybe I'm not legitimate. Maybe I'm in over my head. Maybe I'm a fraud, or I don't know what I'm doing. And people who stay in their comfort zone don't have a reason to feel like an imposter. They don't have a reason to feel like a fraud. But those of us who regularly get outside of our comfort zone, which is where the magic happens, right? It's where the good stuff is, outside of that comfort zone. We're going to have a run-in with that inner critic and feel like, man, maybe I really don't know what I'm doing, because many times we don't. That's part of the learning process.
Yeah. Do you feel like people, in your opinion, how do you, this is aside from the book, but how do you teach that? Do you think you're born with it? Do you think it's you've been around a lot of entrepreneurs, and so you've obviously created a couple companies. And so do you think I've always wondered, like, how can I, because Joni and I, we put ourselves out there, we fail constantly and continue but we get back up, we brush ourselves off and go again. Why do so many people hold themselves back, I guess, in your opinion? Or that fear?
I think there is something to an entrepreneurship mindset, and even there's limited studies. I hesitate to cite because it's very early, but there's limited studies that have even shown some genetic propensities towards entrepreneurship, right? And you see this in families that have multiple generations of risk takers and entrepreneurs. Some of that is taught and is a product of the environment, but some of it may be, a propensity from your genes that way. However, I do think that it can be learned because you may naturally be risk averse. And in fact, I consider myself to be a pretty risk averse person. People think of me as a big risk taker, but I tend to take very calculated risks and I tend to really analyze, and I think hard about the risks that I'm going to take, and I measure the rewards that I expect to get from taking those risks. So you can learn to develop more risk tolerance by changing your mindset around some things like success and failure and how you define those and how they relate to one another. So while I think some people are naturally bent towards taking more risk, I think it is something that you can learn and develop. It's sort of it's a muscle that you can build and grow if you really want to.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. It's a muscle, right? I used to use the analogy of like a rubber band. Like you can stretch it and stretch it and stretch it further, but I like the muscle.
The muscle,
Yes.
So I got a question for you. So how can the negative things we tell ourselves be some of our biggest strengths, right? If we reframe it the way and look at it differently.
This was one of my biggest realizations in writing this book. I, did a kind of a retrospective on my own career and was looking for stories and examples of how this has affected me and what I've learned over the years. And one of the biggest aha moments that I had in looking at the stages of my career is that many of the moments that I felt the most insecure, the most in over my head, where that inner critic was really beating on me, those were the most critical moments in my career. There were some of the most pivotal times when something great was happening, when I was trying something new, when I was taking risk, when I was exploring, when I was learning a lot in the process. And so as a result of that, I have come to see that imposter feeling, that inner critic, not as a negative sign, but actually a positive sign. So if I'm not feeling a little bit insecure, if I'm not having a little bit of trepidation about what I'm doing, then I'm probably not taking enough risks. But when that voice does start to get louder, when that imposter starts to creep up and tell me, you don't know what you're doing, I see that now as a good sign. I say, okay, that feeling tells me I need to keep going. It tells me I'm onto something.
Yeah.
I'm in good territory. I'm learning something new. There's opportunity here. So I've turned that seemingly weakness that could hold me back into now a strength because it propels me. It actually motivates me.
Wow. And do you feel like, is there something that you do though to make yourself aware of it? Like, so it's like,
there's probably triggers, right?
Or like, and is it something you meditate on and then you're like, or do you write it down? I'm just curious, like, is there maybe some steps that you take to make yourself consciously aware of what's going on?
Yeah, one of my own executive coaches, and I've worked with many coaches over the years as an entrepreneur. One of my coaches named Roger Hall taught me about the difference between self-esteem and self-efficacy. And he said the difference is that self-esteem is largely a feeling. It's an emotion, and it's kind of how you feel about yourself. And we know that our feelings are fickle. But self-efficacy is an honest assessment of my history, my accomplishments, and my capabilities to determine if I'm qualified, if I have the tools necessary to do what I'm attempting to do. And so a key part of that mindset shift and that change, that focus on self-efficacy, is realizing that my ability to try something new and to be successful at it is not about whether I've done that thing before, because I usually haven't if it's new. It's about all the other things I've done in my career, all the other risks that I've taken, all the other things that I've tried and experimented and sometimes failed, but learned in that failing and ultimately been able to learn and experiment my way through it. And so when I am feeling trepid, when I am feeling concerned, when I'm trying something new, as I'm doing now with some things, I'm kind of always, looking at new opportunities and trying to grow myself. Even when I feel insecure in a new endeavor, I will remind myself of the successes I've had in the past. Because one of the things I realize is everything I've ever done, everything I've ever accomplished for the first time was preceded by the same thing, which is a lack of experience. It's always something new the first time you do it. And so many times I've been able to overcome that now just simply the lack of experience doesn't hold me back anymore. I'm not afraid of that because I can look back and rely on that track record of learning my way through the things I've tried to do.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Do you, I'm very fortunate to have a wife, but also a business partner that, so we get to talk a lot and it can be a detriment because we're talking about business or something 24/7, but at the same time, but I'm able to, I guess when those moments, like you just mentioned, I have the luxury of being able to talk, she'll talk me, she might just be listening and I'm actually doing all the talking, but then I get the answer and the revelation. And sometimes she just says, hey, Shawn, you've done this before. Hey, Shawn, do you remember you've done, it's maybe not that exact same thing, but you've done X, Y, and Z. So do you find that as well? And I know in your book, you talk a lot about, finding that mentor or
surrounding yourself with the right people.
Who you surround yourself.
Absolutely.
Yes. Can you speak to that?
I mean, what you're talking about is community. And whether it's a husband and wife that can rely on each other, whether it's a peer group of other entrepreneurs, people in your circle, whether it's, just even a social circle of friends that can encourage you, we need other people to reset our perspective. When we get isolated, when we're alone, that voice can get really loud and it can tell us all kinds of terrible things that we can't come up with a response to. And it can really warp our sense of reality. But when we're connected to other people, they are the ones that can say, hey, hang on now. This is not that different from what you've done before. It feels different, but look at this and this. Look at how it relates to these other things in your past. Look at what you've learned that's going to help you here. Look at the capabilities you've built in this other area that are going to translate to what you're about to do. You really are equipped to do this. You just don't see all the pieces connecting yet. And we need other people to provide that kind of perspective for us in our lives so we don't get trapped in that cycle of just the negative thoughts in our own head.
Totally agree.
Do you, I'm just curious, throughout, I don't know if you taught this before you exited your companies or if you still have them, but do you do anything with your staff to help them? I'm just curious, is there any, we're always, in our organizations, we're very big on, self-improvement.
And yeah.
Yeah. So is there any advice you can give to how maybe an entrepreneur can implement some of this stuff and learning in their own organization?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of key things, and the leader certainly sets the tone for an organization. For sure. Number one, you've got to be willing to admit a mistake and a failure and a weakness, a weak spot, an area that you're not an expert, where you don't have the stuff you need, and you've got to rely on others. Mm-hmm. The other thing, though, I think is a key phrase that has got to become not only acceptable, but normalized in an organization. And that phrase is, I don't know. Mm-hmm. You have to build a culture where people feel comfortable and confident saying, I don't have the answer to that, but I'm willing to go figure it out. I'm willing to learn. And I bet we can figure it out together. Yeah. Because if people are afraid to say, I don't know, if they feel compelled to have the answers, then they're going to make stuff up. Mm-hmm. They're going to fake it till you make it, which is not a phrase that I like or think is healthy. Yeah. They're going to just come up with the closest thing they can think of, and that's going to prevent you from actually getting the right answer. And it's also going to feed that imposter syndrome, because they know they don't know it, and they're just afraid to say it to anyone. And if everybody else just kind of smiles and nods and takes what they say, then they go on feeling like a fraud. Yeah. But by being comfortable saying, I don't know, but we can figure that out, people can let down their mask a little bit and not have to feel like they have to fake it.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
That's
wow,
good.
Love it.
Yeah, because we had we just went through a little bit of change in some of our leadership, and so I think that was right there. That point was key, because you don't see it as much when they're here, but when they exited, you really notice that they didn't, and maybe. I can put the blame on myself as being the leader and the founder, but I think we made that mistake where we had some people that didn't have that same philosophy, and I think it does carry down. They rather than just saying, hey, I don't know how to do this, or I don't know the answer to this, but let's figure it out together. Mm-hmm. I think and we lost some clients and stuff just because they tried to fake it, and tried to figure it out, and it just and
instead
then
of being honest.
Yeah. So anyway,
for sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in the book, we love how you gave some practical advice. Number one, change the way you think, right, and then change the way you act and react. Can you get deeper into both of these and for our listeners?
Yeah, there are several mindset shifts that I unpack in the book. And these are things I've experienced and had to learn the hard way myself, as well as things I've watched other entrepreneurs. I now work as a coach with dozens of entrepreneurs and their leadership teams, and have coached hundreds of small businesses over the last several years. And I've seen these mindset shifts make a big difference. One of them is how you look at failure and success. And the key shift there is not to think of failure as the opposite of success, but to think of failure as part of the process of success. Failure is learning, and learning leads to success. And you guys know, because you read the book, I gave dozens of examples of very successful people, famous people we've all heard of, who failed their way to those successes, who had lots of mistakes and setbacks along the way, but they were learning in the process. Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of it. And so, imposter syndrome at the core is the fear of two things. It's the fear of vulnerability, being exposed for who you really are. And it's the fear of failure, and particularly failure in public. So when you change your mindset about failure and you start to think of failure as learning and failure as part of the process to success, the fear of failure begins to fade away. And so you counteract that negative voice warning you that you're going to fail. That's okay. Failure is learning.
Yeah.
So I have a mantra that when I attempt something new or something for the first time or something where I'm not sure what's going to happen, there's only going to be one of two outcomes. I'm either going to succeed or I'm going to learn. Those are the two options for me. And as long as I do one of those two things, it's a win.
Right.
And I keep going.
That's a good
So,
way to
so
look at
that's some of the mindset shifts. Another mindset shift is around vulnerability. I told you the other fear of imposter syndrome is vulnerability, and we're afraid of being exposed. But vulnerability is the cure for imposter syndrome. Vulnerability is actually what we need. It's how we connect with people. And one of the misconceptions about vulnerability is that vulnerability comes after you have trust, that you have to build trust first and then you can be vulnerable. But in reality, vulnerability precedes trust. Vulnerability is how you build trust. And so you have to be willing to take a risk and get vulnerable in order to begin the process of building trust so that you can have that healthy community that's going to protect you. And that takes a shift in your mindset about how you think about the risks with being vulnerable.
Wow. I don't think I've never heard anybody say it like that, because normally you think it's like you got to trust before you think it's the opposite way. And I've never heard it. Yeah. Like that.
I've learned to use vulnerability to build trust in situations where it's really, really important.
Yeah.
And to build it faster with the people that I want to build trust with, and to test people as to whether they're capable of being trusted. It does involve some risk to get vulnerable when you're not sure if you can trust someone,
right.
But the benefits are enormous. Yeah. And I have learned that the benefits outweigh the risk most of the time.
Most of the time. Yeah. Who was in your book you quoted? Was it Warren Buffett that said something about this, the failures lead to success? Is that?
There were a number of quotes, but I think, Warren Buffett talked about that. Michael Jordan has talked about his failures leading to success. Of course, there's the famous quote from Edison about creating the light bulb, and 9,000 ways not to create a light bulb. And there were a number of those. Yeah.
And I love the way you put it with, that you have only two outcomes. Either you have the success or you learn from it. And I think that's a great lesson for, like, we have a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I think it's a great lesson for our kids.
Yes.
So I think it's huge.
It's so great to instill these ideas in kids at a young age. It's gonna be transformative. One of the most just personally gratifying things that have happened since I published this book is I've had several people send me pictures of their kids reading my book.
Oh, that's awesome.
And though I wrote it primarily for entrepreneurs and business leaders and stuff, the fact that teenagers and middle school and high school kids are picking these up and putting these principles inside them early, it really makes me feel like I'm having an impact, and I love that.
And I think it's like they don't feel like they're alone with it. And I think as a kid, like our son, our 12-year-old, I know he battles this stuff constantly.
Great book for him to read.
And but just to know he's not alone. These are common thoughts. These are, and this is how you can work your way through it, I think would be awesome for him.
Yes. And if they can build that confidence, they can be the catalyst for their social circle. They can be the one to be vulnerable first in their friend group and start to open those doors of conversation. And so it has a cascading effect. If one person can really get this, they can spread it to their circle of influence, and there's a ripple effect then.
Awesome.
That's great.
Do you that was pretty much the questions you had for the book, but do you any other like takeaways that we didn't ask you that you would want to be mentioned about the book? I'd love to hear about it, and then how can they get your book?
Yeah, there's one little tidbit that I almost didn't even put in the book because I wasn't sure if it was all that valuable, but I've had so much feedback on it, so I'll share it here. And that is that one of the symptoms of imposter syndrome is the inability to accept a compliment at face value.
Yeah. That's so
that
true.
When someone says, you did a great job, we tend to downplay it with sarcasm, or we make a joke, or we say, oh, it's not a big deal. We deflect. And what I came to realize is that when someone pays you a compliment and you deflect it or diffuse it or downplay it, you're actually insulting that person. You're actually telling them that their opinion doesn't matter, or that they don't know what they're talking about, or that you don't respect their opinion of you. And so I've really been personally challenged, and I've challenged my readers and many listeners when I go and speak, that we should just stop doing that. We need to start accepting the compliments that we're given. It's like someone's handed you a gift and you just said, oh, it's not really worth anything. And we set it aside. No, own it. take it, unpack it, be grateful. And so my challenge to your viewers, your listeners, is the next time somebody pays you a compliment and you want to, your reaction, your gut is to downplay or diffuse it or cast it aside. Just take a breath, look them in the eye and say, thank you. I really appreciate that.
That's
without
awesome.
qualification, without hesitation, just accept it. And the great thing is when you do that, when you force yourself to do that, you actually start to believe it a little bit more. Yeah. You stop the cycle of negative self-talk in your own head, and you can start to own your strengths, which is a great byproduct of this building your confidence.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, because you're talking to us right now.
No, but I think probably 70% of us,
Yes.
Yeah. But
we're so common.
I think we're, for sure, I know we struggle with compliments and accepting it. And I always took it as what's the word, when you're I'm shy and introverted. So I always took it as that's how introverts are, but it's not. And I got to look at it with a different perspective, that I'm actually disrespecting the other person that's giving it. Yeah. I'm just trying to usually try to deflect it, and tell a joke or change the subject or something. But I need to really. So thank you for saying that.
Thank you for sharing that. I think our listeners would get a lot of value out of that. So I appreciate that. Kris, if you were just starting, if you can go back to your early 20s, what advice would you give yourself?
Ooh, this is a good question. And I think I would tell myself to learn everything you can, try things sooner. Don't wait till you feel like you're an expert to give it a shot. And probably to encapsulate that, I would say that the real learning of anything begins when you start doing it. And that's actually a quote. I'm going to give credit to Chris McCluskey, a guy that I've worked with that is a great executive coach and founder of a coaching school. And he said that to me one time when we were talking about this very topic, is the real beginning of something or the real learning of something begins when you start doing it. And I just think that is so, so true. So I would want myself to start doing things earlier than I feel comfortable, and to take those risks and get comfortable with those risks.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
Another question we ask a lot of our guests is, what's your next? I know you've, been promoting this book. It's been doing really, really well. Are you starting any new companies? Are you writing another book? What's your next? Can you speak to any of that?
Yeah, people ask me all the time. As soon as I publish this book, people ask me, "Are you working on another book? Another one?" And I said, "Man, this was a lot of work. Let me raise this baby before I try to have another one for just a minute." But there are some other potential book ideas. I'm pretty certain that I will write another book at some point, but I haven't decided which one is next yet. But I'm building on this content. I'm actually in the process, in the early stages of creating an online course. And I've just launched a group coaching program. I have a cohort running in Kenya, actually, a group coaching program around this book, and doing a deep dive study of overcoming the imposter. And so I have some other programming and curriculum in the works around this content. This issue of imposter syndrome is not new, and it's not going away. So I believe that this has a long, long shelf life, and I'm building this content and these ideas in a way that they'll be just as relevant 25, 30 years from now as they are today. Because this isn't a problem with the time period we're in. This isn't a cultural issue. It's a human problem. And I've found that it is global, and it transcends cultures, and it affects so many people. So there's a lot of work to be done to get the word out and overcome this.
That's awesome. I didn't even think of that. It's around the world, right? It's something that everybody deals with, and I would think it's even more prevalent today than before. But that's awesome. So how can our guests work with you, get a hold of you, social media sites, your coaching platform, and can you share some of that?
Sure. I'm easy to find online. If you remember that my name starts with a K, Kris Kelso. So I'm at kriskelso.com.
Okay.
You can also find the book specifically at overcomingtheimposter.com. And I'm Kris Kelso on LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm also the Kris Kelso on Facebook and Instagram. So I'm pretty easy to track down. Right on my website, there's a form where you can send me a message, and I read every one of those personally. They do not go into some box somewhere where somebody else filters them. So I get them, and I love to hear, how my content and these ideas have helped people.
Yeah, so this is awesome. Shawn and I are big on self-development, and our listeners love whenever we share new books, and I think they're just going to absolutely love this. So guys, get this book. Shawn and I read it. Our son is probably going to read this. So thank you again for the content. It was great.
Awesome.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Sounds good. Well, again, you can get this Amazon. Go to his website, kriskeslo.com. Otherwise, we'll see you all next week.
See ya, everyone.
You've been listening to Inside the Wolf's Den, an entrepreneurial journey with Shawn and Joni Wolfswinkle. Tons of entrepreneurial podcasts are out there. Talking. But Joni and Shawn are living it every single day. Their portfolio now includes many franchises and medium-sized businesses. We talk about the trials and motivators of successfully running a business. Join us again soon for another podcast. But until then, reach out on the website at InsideTheWolf'sDen.com, on Facebook at Inside the Wolf's Den, on Instagram at Inside the Wolf Den. We'll see you again soon. This is Inside the Wolf's Den. We'll see you next time.